Hey, this is Randy, and I'm the Cheap Audio Man. And today is our first ever. Well, we've done more interviews than just this, but this is going to be kind of a reoccurring theme where it's not just about audio, although today is just all about audio. But we have Charlie Puzo. Charlie is one of my patrons, and we had the coolest conversation about his background and what he's doing. And I immediately knew that I wanted to do an interview with you, Charlie. So
Cool.
tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your background too, and where you're at
Sure.
today.
Yeah. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I was born in 1973. Why that's relevant? One is I grew up in the age of Nirvana and grunge music, and I also grew up in a household where my father had run a bunch of nightclubs in Seattle, and one of them was the Penthouse, and this was a jazz club from 1961 to
Did
1968.
it, did anybody ever show up there and were like, "This is not at all what I thought it was going to be"?
Oh, you mean show up at the Penthouse?
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Um,
It's a joke, because they're
Oh,
periodic.
well, yeah, no, the Penthouse had some very, I mean, there's a really interesting story where this one kid would keep coming in the back and he was too young to be in the bar as 21 and over. And my dad would go, he kept coming back and coming back. And so my dad would be like, all right, you can hang out in the back. And if the cops come, I'll tell you to take off. And that was Jimi Hendrix. So he used to come to the
No
club.
kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, pretty crazy. My dad recorded with a local radio station. They did a recording every Friday and live music from the club, and it was broadcast over the telephone lines. But the recording setup was set up there, and it was all matched to reel, or recorded to reel. And those reel to reel masters were in my house growing up. So, you know, to bring this around to what the Cheap Audio Man does, we had this Akai setup in our house, and it was like the 1970s, just ultimate Akai setup with the reel to reel. I was a very lucky kid, and I we would string up these reel to reels and listen to them. And
Like, how
I
many
was born in '70.
recordings did you guys have?
I have personally still over 450 reel to reels with
Wow,
color
and
tape.
those were
Yeah,
all live performances at your
1961 to 1968.
from your
And it's
dad's
everyone
your
from,
dad's
yeah,
club.
Coltrane, Aretha Franklin,
Wow.
everybody.
Man, I
Yeah.
hope you labeled them properly.
They were labeled properly by a man named Jim Wilkie, who's still alive and amazing. And he was a young kid at the time. My dad passed 5 years ago, but
Oh.
he's my partner in re-releasing all of this music, along with Zev, my producer, who kind of handles a lot of the interaction between me and the record labels.
So how did that work? So you have all these, like, all this, not footage, but all these recordings,
Hmm.
and so you wanna release one, like, take us through, like, how that works.
Well, it's really like I had no idea. I moved from Seattle to Los Angeles to go to Cal Arts, and then I took my career path and dropped out of Cal Arts and started working in animation in around 92, 93,
Can
and
you
worked
make
in
me into a
animation.
cart like a superhero?
Yeah, I could. Um, Not as well as I used to be able to because I don't draw as much as I used to, but yeah, no. But yeah, I and moving down to Los Angeles, I knew about that we had this amazing collection. As I got involved with people in the music business, I had talked to them about different ways of maybe releasing the music, but I was always kind of concerned, being a record collector and being into music, and my dad having relationships with some of the artists, that I never want to do bootlegs or anything kind of,
Right.
on the it really had to be done the right way. And so it took literally 25 years to really get to a place where I met Zev Freeman, who helps me with, like I said, he's the guy that's really kind of been my liaison, and he works for a lot of the labels and does a lot of the archival jazz releases for like I said, a bunch of different labels. So he helped me and got me in touch with Jim Wilkie over the again, and so we kind of partnered, the three of us, and we worked with the different labels to get them out. But it was a long process. I mean, it's the legality of it is that they're jazz recordings. So you have the record label, you have the artist estate, if the artist is still around and wants to release them, that's a song and dance, and then also there's, if they recorded if they it depends on if they had original music or if they were singing someone else's song. So it
Mm.
gets pretty deep. And then
How
you have,
many how many
yeah,
do you have ready for like release, or how many have been
I
released at this point?
can't say how many, like there's a couple in there's a few always kind of in different states of process. Some of these take a couple of years to kind of get done. We released since 2015, we've released eight releases on
Mhm.
various labels, and we're hoping for another two this year. But I don't know if it's actually going to happen. But we try to. Some of them get released on record store days. The other ones are like direct to consumer. With the jazz community, they're audio files, so they
Yeah.
want really, a lot of, and I'm probably you're familiar with this too. A lot of people that are super into jazz or recordings or live recordings are going to see who mastered this,
Mhm.
who, what was the source material. They're really into that, and so if you want to sell CDs to the foreign market or to that audiophile community, it's really important also who's putting out the music.
Yeah. So where can people get them? The stuff that's
Yeah,
out there
so
right now?
the vinyl is record store day or limited releases, most of it. You can still go to Resonance Records. I actually could give you a link to I have a website that I don't sell anything personally on the website. It's just links to the different I have a releases page, and it has information
Mhm.
on every release. So you can just go to my website, and my website's really just out there to kind of just have a presence so people can go, oh, here's where the different releases are. It's not really a marketing or a selling thing for me.
Okay, I'll drop that in the description. But what is it? Just off the
It's charliespenthouse.com.
charliespenthouse.com. All right. Just like it sounds.
Yeah.
Spelled just like it sounds.
Yep.
Well, very cool, man. So you can't share what you're working on.
I
Do you?
can't. I mean, it's one of those things where it's I hate that. Like I've been in the movie business for a long time, and you sign all these NDAs, and you're like, your friends
Yeah.
are coming over. What are you working on? I can't tell you. So it sounds so lame. But yeah, I mean, we're working with some estates, and when you're working with the estates, it's very fragile. It could just slip
Yeah.
away at any moment. So
Yeah.
you just kind of keep
Yeah.
quiet about it.
Yeah. Well, you also have a physical brick and mortar store, correct?
So what happened is I had been friends with this guy, one of my good friends, Trevor. He owns Jackknife Records and Tapes, and I've
Okay.
been going to his store since I moved to Los Angeles years ago. And it's been my passion, obviously, since I've been five. I've been collecting records, and I've never worked in a record store. And we kind of decided this last year after the pandemic, I kind of want to make a change in my life. And so we partnered together. And so I'm working with him at Jackknife Records and Tapes here in Los Angeles. We're setting up satellite stores, and we're going to do a kind of a cool space for doing concerts, and then we'll have and hopefully another store opening up soon. But right now we have a store in Atwater Village in Glendale, California.
And what's the business been like? Has it slowed down during COVID? Did it pick up? I imagine probably it picked up because people wanted to buy music,
It,
right? Or no?
yeah, I mean, I think all of us got kind of no matter what the cost, we wanted to stay sane at home, and those of us who love music, vinyl, and movies probably went a little crazy, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sure your channel picked up, right? Because you want to
Well,
do it.
that the channel was started in the middle of COVID. So
Wow, right.
this it didn't I didn't exist. Well, I
Well, I mean, I
exist.
got hit to you
The
about a year
channel.
ago, right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that through Instagram, I saw your Instagram, and then I kind of linked to your YouTube, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to reference this guy all the time. Because people come to
Yeah.
me, I'm one of those assholes who actually bought a lot of really expensive equipment, and I did it through trading and other various things as collectors do. But I got a chunk of money together and kind of made my end system. But I'm always trying to help people put together good systems. Being at a record store and being a person that people reference to, like help finding rare records, or just coming to me off of my Instagram and asking me, hey, what kind of a record player should I get my daughter? People
Yeah.
get me that a lot, and so I always reference your page. We talked about this before about what's good for that. But yeah, so to answer your first question, the pandemic was crazy. I mean, I think that people for some got money, and whether they should have saved it or not, I think people were getting kind of like paid to stay home,
Hmm.
and they were spending money on records and vinyl. Now that the war broke out and there's so much craziness and the Bitcoin market drops and all these, the stock market drops, I think you're not seeing people spending a couple $100 on records on the weekend. So it's slowed down in my opinion.
Yeah.
Greatly, I think, over the last month or two.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that, yeah, but there's opportunity there, right? You still see.
Absolutely. I think, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think people got super into being, like, I always talk about physical. I think people want physical things to hold again. I think we went through this thing, and I think there's a balance now of, like, there's not this like, oh, vinyl sucks, it doesn't sound as good as, you know, streaming or whatever, and we can get into that debate, but I think there's a balance now of, like, you can have both things, right? You can have, like, I stream music in my super high-end system that's a 2-channel stereo, and I see people coming into the store, they have Spotify playlists and they buy a $40 records, but most of their listening is going to be on Spotify.
Right.
So I think there's a cool balance now of where I think people want physical things, maybe not to the extreme of some of us that go crazy with collecting, but I think people want, and it's cool gifts, right? I mean, Christmas time is always a big boom, and it's amazing what sells at Christmas. It's like Dolly Parton, Fleetwood Mac, you know what I mean? Like Green Day, like things that are so like us as record collectors, or, you know, everyone, like the things that you think wouldn't sell, those things are, people are buying those for people probably who just have their first turntable. That's what I see.
Yeah. What about the age of the people coming in? Is it across the board? Is it mostly guys our age?
No, it's really across the board. I work on the store on Saturdays, and I'd never worked in a record store before, and I've been in them my whole life. And so it's super fun for me to kind of, because I do a lot of buying, and I'm doing purchasing of new records as well. So it's really good to have that interaction with people actually buying in the store. And little girls, like 8-year-old came up and put her Billie Eilish record on there and was like, yeah. And so, and then, you know, you have guys, you know, do you guys have the, you know, the guy, the 78s guy come in, you know, he's like kind of hunched over. He's been carrying 78s his whole life. He comes in and you talk to him for a few minutes. It's pretty cool. So it's a wide, I mean, it's a huge wide range, but, you know, LA is full of, like, you know, cool hipster guys, and they pay a lot of money for some records that I don't even know what they are, but they pay a lot of money for them.
So in your store, is it a kind of combination between used and new, or is it just new?
So we do, right now we have 2 satellite that are completely new releases. So I manage one of those. One's at Romancing the Bean, which is a coffee house here in Burbank, and I've set up a kiosk basically, and it's all new records, kind of like what you would have at like an Urban Outfitters or something like that, but it's curated by me. So it's got awesome stuff.
Nice.
So it's a little bit, it's like, it's got Tupac, it's got classical, it's got Led Zeppelin, it's got, you know, Foo Fighters, and it's Burbank's K-Rock. So there's a lot of alternative stuff in there, you know, Joy Division, Depeche Mode, that kind of stuff. And some of the early K-Rock stuff does really well in Burbank, but you know, it's surprising to me because I'll look at what we sold last month and it's just it's like all over the place. So it's nice to have a really cool curated. I feel like when you go into like a Target or Urban Outfitters, it's very corporate, and this feels like very curated. So I try to make it really cool. And we want to try to do a couple of those around town. And then we have new records at the store in Atwater, but that we also have our really rare records there. So right now we have like a Butcher cover Beatles record. We have a sealed Eminem first pressing of his first album.
What does something like that go for?
Well, the hip hop sealed stuff is kind of crazy. It's funny that the 12 inches don't go for much anymore, but the sealed albums from that era are kind of like the thing right now. Like people really are into that, and you can get, you know, those go into the $300-$400 range for a sealed Eminem. And then like I think our Butcher is a second state unpeeled for $1,000.
Okay.
So, but you know, then we have like a Alice in Chains with the dog cover. First pressing, and that's, you know, a couple $100. But then we have some great, you know, $30 and $40 records, you know, some great Miles Davis, you know, mono records and stuff like that. So we have a variety. It's not like you're going to come in there and just be completely blown out with just expensive records on the walls. So we try to like mix it up a little bit.
Now, can people buy online, or do you
Jackknife Records and Tapes has a huge presence on Discogs.
Okay,
so,
cool.
And we do it at our kiosks as well, which I think is really cool. We have QR codes, so when people go in and into our store, they can just click the QR code, and then it goes right to the Disc Dog store where you're in the section that you want to be in, and you can kind of look up stuff. And then if you're here in Los Angeles, you don't have to pay shipping and stuff. We can bring them to the physical store for you.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your what do you call it? Animation background. Like, did you work
Yeah.
on anything
So
cool?
yeah, I mean, I think so. But yeah, I came
Right.
to I came to town in the early '90s, and my first big job was working for Chuck Jones. He started up again his career in, I think it was '96, '97 when he did Chariots of Fur, and I came in just after that, and they were doing theatrical release cartoons with Chuck Jones again. And this is the kind of when the Warner Brothers stores kind of kicked off in the '90s, and a kind of animation boom was happening. So I worked for Chuck Jones Film Productions at Warner Brothers for a while, and we did theatrical shorts. And then I would also work with Ted B. Miller and Sons. We would do some stuff with them, and they would be shooting, like I would do camera with them, animation camera. And so I worked on a lot of, like, I worked on Simpsons and Ren and Stimpy and a bunch of different shows. And then I moved on to Disney, and at Disney I worked on a film called Dinosaur. I was there on that show for a couple of years, and then once I worked for Warner Brothers Disney, and then I kind of broke off and started working in visual effects. My last years at Disney, I was working at what was called the Secret Lab at the time. So we were working on like Red Planet and Pearl Harbor and some of those '90s Bruckheimer films,
Yeah.
doing visual effects work. The movie Dinosaur that I had worked on was a computer animated film with live action backgrounds. So it was very much like a visual effects shoot. So I got very interested in visual effects and in motion capture. And then I started working with a company called X Trackers, which was a motion capture company, and we worked out of the Jim Henson lot. And so I worked on some stuff at Henson and worked on some projects there, and then worked in visual effects for a few years. And then my last years working in the industry, I worked for Surreal Studios running their sound stages. So it's like a
Oh,
rental
cool.
house, and it was and then we shot a lot of music videos and little sections of films. It wasn't a giant studio like Warner Brothers, but it's like one of the smaller studios where you rent, and we had some physical sets that we would shoot in, shot like ER and some sequences like where they would need a different hospital than the one they actually shoot in. So I supervised that. But yeah, that's
Did
a quick
you?
rundown.
So you probably met some famous types.
Yeah.
Anybody stick out to you that nice, not nice? Probably don't talk about the not nice ones. Anybody that was
Uh,
really cool to you?
I mean, one of the coolest ones was back when I was working on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank. It was a cool place to work because that lot was like kind of like you got to know everyone. And when I first started working there, I worked in the mailroom and at the Warner Brothers store there. I was like 20 years old, and I was, at that age, I was very ambitious to meet people and hang out and talk to people. And I ended up meeting Clint Eastwood, and how that happened is he came in, and I was setting aside some music for his production office, and he was like, "Oh, I've been to your dad's club," after we started talking. And so he invited me down to the office, and then when my dad came to town, he brought my dad in and took him to lunch. So that was
Very
like
cool.
Clint was really cool to my dad, and remembered my dad and stuff. So that was pretty cool. And then yeah, I mean, I think the coolest music, if we want to keep on music things, the best one ever is I was working at the Henson Company, which is it's Charlie Chaplin's old studio off Sunset Boulevard. It's one of the first movie studios in Los Angeles, and it's where A&M Records has their famous recording studio. And so I was working out of this thing it's called the Schoolhouse. It was this little office set, and it was right outside the door of the A&M Records, and you'd have all these people coming and recording there. And this minivan pulls up in front of and we have the door open, and we're working on this visual effects thing. And these people start pouring out of this van, and one of them is Paul McCartney. And I'm just like,
No, no kidding.
and I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go with and this is before, everyone's taking pictures with phones and stuff like that. And he just walked in, and what are you guys doing? And the producer of our show came over and started talking to him, and he hung out for like 45 minutes, and we showed him everything we were doing. And I didn't geek out. I didn't do that thing like, oh man, your music means so much to me. But he just got to kind of talk to him, and then he just kind of asked me questions. So I thought that was like one of the best meetings of a person I really admire.
Yeah. So what's your
Yeah.
favorite music? I mean, personally, I know you're kind of all over the map, but
I
what's
am
your
all over
favorite
the
stuff
map.
from like the 90s? Like growing up in the 90s,
So
'cause we're about the same
I,
age.
right. So my big band is Depeche Mode, believe it
Okay.
or not. So and then as far as I knew Peter Cornell. My dad owning jazz clubs. My brother, who's passed away now, but he is 16 years older than me. He was involved in the club scene as well in Seattle. And Peter Cornell and him and a friend of my brother's knew each other really well. And so I got to hear a lot of Soundgarden and go to a lot of shows. Really, really got to. So that's my Seattle band. So as far as I got to see, like Nirvana at the Ballard Firehouse when they were like high on heroin and just falling over and crazy stuff. But I got to see a ton of shows. But I moved to Los Angeles in '91, so I kind of got the early a part of that whole scene. So even though I was into electronic music, and then I was DJing at my brother's clubs and in undergrounds and raves. So I was into the whole. I would do house parties and hip hop, and then I got into house music and then into techno, and we would throw raves. So I was in that scene, but I loved rock too. So it was kind of a cool scene that was going on in Seattle because a lot of the people that would be, going to rock shows then would come to our after hours shows. And so it was a kind of cool eclectic mix. But yeah, and then I'm a huge Prince fan. Like he's
Yeah, cool.
my guy. But Alice in Chains, if you were talking like the core of that, I love Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. I mean, Pearl Jam and those guys are amazing, but Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden are my guys. Those are the '90s bands for me.
Yeah. Alice in Chains, when I was, I think it must have been, right before 90, because somebody asked me if I'd ever heard of Alice in Chains. And I said, Alice Cooper? And he's like, no, 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 Alice in Chains. And he pulled out a copy of Facelift, and it was on cassette at the time.
Yeah.
And he put it in, and I'm like, ooh. I'm like, I've never heard anything. Because at the time, it was like all like David Lee Roth, glam band, stuff like that. That's like
Yeah.
everything I was used to
Yeah.
listening to. And then this was like different. And I was like, okay. So I was off to the races as soon as I heard that Facelift
Yeah. I
record
mean,
on cassette.
it was amazing to kind of be in Seattle. You couldn't escape it. And like everyone in that era that's like me, I'm going to be 50 this year. And all of us have stories of interacting with all these bands and being around the music so much because it was such a scene of it was a scene trying not to be a scene. Like it's that classic thing where all these guys were trying not to be rock stars. So they would just be at 7-Eleven and and they would go to coffee shops where you would be at and you'd be like, oh, there's Eddie Vedder. And it wasn't like, I'm not telling a story that most Seattle people my age, if you were out and about and you wanted to see music, you could really interact with them. It's pretty cool. But yeah, I remember the first Lollapalooza. That's when I saw. I believe that was Alice in Chains in that first Lollapalooza up in Seattle. It was amazing. Like I think it was around that time. Maybe it wasn't at Lollapalooza, but I remember seeing them live, Alice in Chains, and just being like, whoa,
Yeah.
so talented, just crazy.
Yeah. Well, very cool, man. You got anything else you want to talk about?
I was curious your thoughts on where we're going with, like, it seems like there's this huge push in like for streaming, right? In a lot of the and what's your thought on that? Like where do you like how do you where do you between streaming and actually physically playing? Like, because I still love CDs. I think like as far as like, a really high quality CD player is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like such a great way. Like when people ask me like, oh, what should I get into? Get into CDs right now if you really want good quality music for cheap. Like
Mm-hmm.
CDs are priced well, and
Mm-hmm.
you're still getting a physical thing. I may be alone on this, but I think it's kind of going to be one
No,
of those things.
I don't think you are. I mean, personally, when I'm listening for my edification, my pleasure, it's always
Yeah,
physical media, whether
yeah,
it's a CD or it's vinyl. So
yeah,
for me, there's always going to be that connection between, music and the physical media.
yeah,
And and the actual act of taking it out either of the sleeve or the jewel case and putting it in. Like I just store all my CDs in their jewel cases just
Yeah.
back there. I mean,
Yeah.
I've got records here and records back there too. So
Yeah.
I don't really go crazy over storage. Maybe I should, but I don't.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think the coolest thing is like there's a resurgence, right? So we went through the MP3 days where,
Yeah.
my buddies would rip 100. I don't even know how many MP3s you could fit on a CD, but they would rip all this music onto CDs, but as an MP3 format.
Right.
And then the iPod comes out, and then Napster, and then all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so now, like, if you're our age, yeah, you've been to record stores, right?
Right.
Like, if you're like my son's age, he's 20.
Yeah.
He's never been to a record store, but he came in just last night with Pink Floyd double vinyl.
Right.
And he doesn't even have a turntable, but luckily his dad, knows people
Might
that
have one or two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got a few laying around. But so I think there's kind of like I know guys that have been through the whole physical media thing, and that was all they had. So they love streaming now because just
Right.
the convenience. And they also love streaming, and I love streaming because I didn't always have a choice in what I was going to buy. I would go whatever they had was my choice. And at the time, I didn't have access to listen to anything on the record except what was on the radio. So I knew maybe
Right.
one or two songs that I knew were
Right.
good. And then I'm taking a risk. And at that age, $13 for a CD or something was a lot of money for me. I think
Absolutely.
what's
I mean,
really cool.
for all of
Go
us,
ahead.
right?
Yeah.
No, I think what I use streaming for mostly is to preview music that I want to buy.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I
I do
find
the
it
same
great
thing.
because like when do you ever get a chance where you can just type in anything and just be able to, for the most part, unless it's really rare, be able to listen to something. Oh my God, this sounds amazing. I would love to have this on a CD or vinyl or whatever. Or I'll just keep it in my little streaming thing. I don't want to spend the money on that. I think
Yeah.
that's the interesting thing about music that's changed the most, I think, is there were rockers, there were people into hip hop. There were very few people like myself that spent all their money on music or went to the record store every week to buy records to play at the party that weekend. Like I was one of those guys, but most people in high school, if you were like into rock, you weren't going to spend $13 on even if you thought, oh, that Michael Jackson record's cool, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to buy the next Poison record. So it's like there was this division which kind of made rockers and punks, and I think now it's such a merge. Like kids
Hmm.
growing up, my kids growing up are just into like all sorts of stuff. They'll listen to the Beatles, they'll listen to, Frank Sinatra, and then they'll listen to all their current stuff. So it's, I think it's also because it's just at their fingertips, right?
Yeah. It's so much more accessible than it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm I'm kind of back on the physical media bandwagon. When I'm doing when I'm kind of doing evaluations, it's always streaming. But when
Mhm.
I'm just chilling and I want to just enjoy music, it's almost always on physical media.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is also like I love dead formats because I'm a collector like a crazy person. So in my personal setup, I have a DCC player, a digital compact cassette that came out right around the same time as mini disc.
Yeah.
So I have a
Yeah.
mini disc player. I have a Marantz 8-track player that sounds crazy good, and I've got a nice cassette player, reel to reel, and then I also have like a Betamax and a VHS and a Laserdisc for like because there's certain music that came out in those. It's so
Yeah.
crazy because
It
you can
is
kind of get
crazy, man.
you can get the best of the best in those formats and then run them through. I was talking to you about this, like run it through like a DAC, and you get like this. Some of those like Laserdiscs is pure audio. You're getting such a pure source, and there's all these live performances and stuff that they only put out on laser. It's no one needs to do what I'm doing, but I don't collect it to just like everything that I collect, I play. So if I
Mhm.
can't, I'm not going to collect something I can't play, which drives me crazy. So, but yeah, it's pretty nutty when my friends come over and they want to hear something. I'll like put on an 8-track and it'll sound crazy, and I'm like, yeah, that was an 8-track, and they'll be like, what?
That's
And then it's
cool, man.
funny to find those dead formats, how late they went. Like I have like Duran Duran Rio on reel to reel, and people are like, what? And you're like, yeah, I mean, they had Columbia House made stuff to like 84 or 5. It's crazy.
That's cool, man.
That's
How
fun
what
stuff.
is what is the deal with cassettes? Are they like back?
Cassettes are crazy big right now.
I cannot believe that, man.
Mhm. Well, it's
Actually, I bought
tricky,
this
right?
one new. So
Yeah.
when Metallica remastered the Black Album, which came out last September,
Yep.
you could buy this. So it was $10 for the cassette.
Yeah.
So
I mean, cassettes are big. There's a whole
right
cassette community. Obviously hip hop heads that collect boom boxes and things like that. They want, sealed hip hop is a big thing. But an analog cassette sounds great. If you have a good cassette player, you know what I mean?
I'm going to trust you on that one.
Early 90s, like if you get the early 90s or mid 90s, like Warner Brothers, like some of your favorite bands that you like, Rant, you would love. Look, it's not, is it a perfect medium? No, but it's kind of, it has its own flavor. I'll just say that, right? Like just when you get
I'm
into
going to get the Nakamichi or whatever it's called going and pop that in there and see what it sounds like. Because I've got one.
Do you have the
no.
Flips?
Actually, one of the other patrons sent this to me. It's
nice.
I just need to get it going and it's gonna play.
Did he send you a Nakamichi Dragon? Because I want to be that guy's friend.
No, he did not. But okay. It'll be. But what's funny is like I had boxes of these, right?
Yeah.
Threw them out, and I'm in Half Price Books the other day, and I'm looking at they have a locked glass case, and there's like Metallica, like Kill 'Em All, and it's $50. I'm like, what?
Go check out our store on. Dude, check out our store online and look at our store, and it's crazy. We do so many cassettes. It's crazy.
That blows me away, man. That blows me away.
So, I was just saying, like, there's all sorts of collectible cassettes now and all that kind of stuff. And, different artists, when you get into collecting an artist or you get into collecting a group like you are into Metallica, you get all these crazy things. But again, cassettes, like I always have to warn people, like, I'm like, okay, you're buying a used cassette. You may have to, it's going to be dry. The pads are going to go out on it. Like you kind of got to give them that talk. Like you're going to vintage. It's not like a record where it's pretty much going to work unless you have a really crappy record player or it's scratched to hell. But some of the other formats like reel to reels and cassette tapes and stuff like that, but they last pretty well. I mean, I don't know. I like the sound of it.
Do you think so do you think like companies are really reinvesting back into physical media? I know vinyl is do you see more releases on vinyl now than
I mean, I think they're invested. I think anywhere they can make money. It's not in the quantities that they used to, right? But I mean, Impulse originally Impulse had released in 1971 live John Coltrane live from Seattle, which was from my dad's club, and then Impulse came to me years later, and then they released the Love Supreme John Coltrane album from the club that was released in 2021. So I mean, Impulse is about as big as you get, and it's Universal, so they're interested, right? And they spent some good money on promoting it and doing that. So, and then the smaller labels like Thompson Square, who released Bola Sette with us last year, they're a smaller label, but it was a 3 CD set, So I think, those smaller companies, they have to, and Bola Sette is not a well-known, jazz guitar, I think doesn't get its proper due. I think people think jazz guitar and they don't, and it's amazing stuff. I mean, we got a forward by Santana in that, and just some really cool, like, press. And so I think that there's definitely, we're talking about jazz music, right? So that's a niche market with a small audience compared to Billie Eilish, right? So when you go to Billie Eilish's website, she's got like cassettes, like you were talking about, 3 or 4 colors. I mean, like St. Vincent had an 8-track release last year.
What?
Yeah. So I mean, they're into it.
That's cool, though. That's cool.
Yeah,
so physical media is here to stay.
I would think so. It's never completely gone away because there's crazy people like us out there that keep buying and collecting. But I think it ebbs and flows, right? I think the
good thing is when I'm walking through Walmart and there's an end cap with a bunch of records on there, and you can buy a couple at Walmart.
Yeah,
like I remember
there's Walmart exclusives.
That's
it's crazy.
This right here is a Walmart exclusive, and it's good. It's green,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it sounds good. But the point is, like, it's come full circle because I was a kid in Walmart, and I didn't grow up in a big city, so I don't. There were like dedicated record stores, but that was like way far away. So if I'm buying
Was that
music,
your
I'm buying
record
it
store
at
as a
Walmart.
kid? Was that your
Pardon?
record store when you what was the
So
first time you went and physically bought a record on your own? Because I remember it distinctly. It was a
yeah,
really big moment for me.
well, for me, it was a cassette, and it
Okay.
was Huey Lewis and the News 4,
Yeah.
and it was at a pharmacy. I grew up in a really small town in rural
Right.
Nebraska,
Right.
and so they had some cassettes. They have like maybe 10 cassettes there. It was all the same stuff though. It was like Michael Thriller, Huey
Yeah.
Lewis,
Yeah.
the Cult for whatever reason. You could get the Cult like anywhere. I don't know. It's so
Interesting.
weird. And then a lot of R&B stuff, so
Yeah.
Prince and stuff, but
Yeah.
poppy stuff. But then Walmart had a much bigger music section, and so you
Right.
could get a lot of stuff there. But my first CD was NXS Kick and Poison.
Nice.
The one, and I had the one that they blacked out like most of the front because it was the big cat with the long tongue and whatever. They actually
Yeah. Yeah.
censored that cover.
Yeah.
So those were my first 2 CDs, but yeah, I remember buying it, man. But it's so cool that it's pretty decent vinyl section.
Did
When you're
you
in there, and to have
did
it
you
be
buy those
that
CDs in the
mainstream again.
Did you buy CDs in the long boxes? Were they in the long boxes when you bought the CDs? This is how crazy I get with like collecting my. So there's a Soundgarden, my original long box.
Oh wow, that's
I was-
awesome.
So yeah, this is one of my first.
I'm
You know,
sorry.
I bought at Tower Records, and this is how. And my friend's job at Tower Records, she would cut these and throw them in the trash. So like her job, they'd come in with the long boxes,
Oh man,
and she would cut them up,
yeah,
and so they could put them like CDs are stored now, like in a little, because they took up too much room after a while, and now they're super valuable sealed.
Yeah.
Like.
much. Well, hey man, I'm having some connection issues, so
All
let's
right,
let's call this one, man. But I
let's call it.
appreciate you being on, man. And so
Hey,
I'll drop your all the links into the description.
yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, there's
appreciate you being on, man.
yeah, man. Just a link to Jackknife Records and Tapes, and then maybe to the releases page on my little website there, and then an Instagram tag, and that'd be dope. That'd be great. Appreciate it.